The big problem with the Roid Legacy support is that the whole goal is for you to use Megaroid City to play control, but Megaroid City is actually not a great field spell compared to a lot of the other cards like Dragonic Diagram and Fire King Island that can pop cards in your hand. You have to target a card you control, so if you don't draw any other spells that you can set, then you basically are kind of in trouble. You have to like normal a monster in a deck with very bad extension and hope that popping it still lets you do something. Something I'm pretty skeptical about. It can like flip the attack and defense to make your mobile base like a real threat, and also to keep sending cards to the graveyard so you can eventually banish a whole bunch from Vehicroid. But the big problem is this locks you into fusion monsters the entire turn, and that really restricts what you can do unless you're playing another engine like Branded or something. And even then, the fact that you can't make any sort of utility link monsters or any sort of diseases like the Gear Gigant, anything like that, is really bad for consistency and just trying to get something done. Furthermore, it searches void cards, which feels like they should have more options than they are. But if you want a fusion spell, your only option is Vehicroid Connection Zone, which has a cool upside of can't be destroyed by card effects and its effects can be negated, but only summons Vehicroid fusion monsters, the only ones being Jumbo Drill, a pretty bad card that needs 3 specific materials. Stealth Union, an also pretty bad card that needs 4 specific materials, one of which is one of the worst cards ever, and for some reason, which halves its attack if it attacks, so it attacks as an 1800 that you spent all 4 materials on. It's removal, but only for non-machines, so you can't play it with Clockwork Knight. And Mobile Base, the card that was made to be their new boss monster, and is honestly pretty good, except for the fact that it needs a Void Fusion monster plus a Void monster. It has no built-in protection because you're making it with the connection zone, or it just is doomed. Even with connection zone, it still loses the compulse. You can try to use the fact that it can make copies of itself by targeting your opponent's monsters, and especially from deck or extra, Roid with lower attack to make 2 of it and then make like Gustav, except you can't because again, we are locked into Void monsters if we use this consistency booster at all. Sorry, fusion monsters, not Roid monsters. So it's an okay card, but it's useless on turn 1. It just can attack, but only if you have not used this effect, and so if it has to battle twice in a turn because your opponent is attacking with 2 monsters, they can just run over it with literally anything on the second attack. It has a silly way to like recur advantage, which is cool, but at the end of the day, it's like this is the only card you would ever really want a connection zone into, and it isn't even like a quick effect or anything like that. You can't use connection zone on the cards that proactively win the game, like Barbaroid, or even like Vehicroid, which is useful because it has a very nice restriction that's relatively easy to fulfill. The only generic one is indeed Mobile Base, and that requires you to already have another one. And remember, you are searching 1 fusion spell this turn. So like, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to like activate Vehicroid and banish it from the graveyard to get a Vehicroid, which involves having 5 machines in your graveyard, so that you can eventually go like Connection Zone to make this guy and then win over the course of a billion more turns now that you've banished your graveyard. It just doesn't make sense. Dragonroid's a really annoying searcher. It adds a non-wind Roid, which means it can't search Vehicroid, the only one you really want to be searching. Its other effects are basically filler text, like, oh yeah, like if you open Ready Fusion, Poly, a Roid, and Dragonroid, you can like discard this so your opponent can't Barone the fusion spell, and then you can go like Ready Fusion, Poly, make Mobile Base, and then like XDD Shrug. I mean, they can't like destroy it with the negate, and they can't negate its effect, but like, are you going to threaten the Barone? Like, what are you going to summon? An Armoroid, a Dragonroid from deck, an Armoroid from deck? Like, these aren't going to get over the Barone. They're not going to do anything. You're just going to sit there. I guess you're going to summon Submarine Roid, attack directly, or Vehicroid, attack directly, and then bounce it back to your extra, and then just like chill for a few turns and hope they don't kill you. Surely they can't kill. Surely they don't have an out to an indestructible Mobile Base, right, guys? Surely there's no way to do that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Emergeroid Call. So like, this is supposed to be your other like card you search with Megaroid City, and it's supposed to be interaction, but it's a counter trap that, very importantly, does not destroy. It negates the activation and then sends all cards with the same name as that card. You can't choose not to, so if any of them have graveyard effects, you might as well shoot yourself in the head. If your opponent normals a monster with some dangerous effect, so you try to flip this to stop it, yeah, that's fine, but if you're trying to sit on like some other Roid card, like say you're sitting on Vehicroid to turn on the Emergeroid Call, I mean, if it's like a 1700, you can't destroy that card with this counter trap, so they just kill the 1700, and like, it does have a great graveyard effect where you can banish to add back a Roid, but I mean, that is the good card in this good effect on this card, the Quick Play Roid ad, and it doesn't really synergize with anything except the fact that you can get advantage back with Express Roid, which otherwise can't add itself. Overall, it's just really frustrating. Oh, and I suppose I should mention Duplicate. Speedboard Duplicate is like the card that the Roid Discord loves because it's like, oh my god, we can search an actual interaction with Megaroid City. And indeed, this is an interaction. It's Compulse, but worse. Because what if you had to banish a wind monster from your graveyard to compulse your opponent's cards? Now, to be fair, it targets any card, not just a monster, but like, I feel like that's only going to come up sometimes. And this graveyard effect will never come up because you would have to have another Speedroid, and I don't really see the point of playing most Speedroids in this deck, or in fact playing tuners, especially if you're trying to rely on the Megaroid City engine. Now you can do stuff like special summon Sangan and use fusion deployment to great effect because of these horrible like type lines on these cards, but Stealth Union you kind of want to play so that mobile base can summon removal, except Truckroid and Stealthroid make it are cards you almost never are ever going to want to play, so you're probably not going to be on those, and Drillroid is kind of on thin ice. If you play these cards, you have the problem where you just actually draw the cards, and then you have to like look at hands of cards that do literally nothing except like get normal summoned and die. If you have to play Poly that you can't search, you just kind of have to put 3 of it in here and draw it. You can't use Fusion Recycling Plant to find it. If you're playing more than one copy of Megaroid City, then the extra copies of Megaroid City are completely useless in the hand because you can't like set them to pop them with Megaroid City. You can't pop them in the hand. You can play stuff like Artifacts, I guess, but like that is only increasing the ability to play Megaroid City and like do something vaguely on your turn. It's just really a mess. Oh, and Mixroid is a great card because you can use it to search any of these onto the field. It actually does something. It summons Armoroid to beat over. It doesn't summon Dragonroid, so if you want to get over 2800, well, die, I guess. But you know, it can summon a fusion monster from the graveyard, so if you mill a whole bunch of machines turn 1, you can banish this to summon like Parapsychroid. Note that it doesn't actually fusion summon, that would be too nice. Instead, it has to banish a number of cards equal to the level of that monster, so if you want to summon Barbroid and be goofy, you don't need 5, you need 12 machines in your graveyard that you just say goodbye to. You know, they're just gone. Like, what are you going to do about that? It's not like you're getting them back in engine in this archetype. So you just kind of, you know, chilling. You're like, well, I mean, it is a strategy, and you can use, like, Express Roid looping to make Guardian Chimera a bunch of times. But it lacks a bunch of flexibility. Like, you can't use your Force to make your Giant X if you have this card going at all. You want to be using this card so that you can, like, send stuff, so that you can maybe summon something big, but, like, it's really vulnerable to removal. And again, nothing in this archetype is just like Ancient Gear Hunting Hound and able to fusion summon on its own. Nothing in this archetype is just Poly. Your only fusion that you can search is exactly for the Vehicroid Connection Zone, unless you're playing generic cards like Keeper of Dragon Magic. And because Mixroid is such an important normal, playing another normal summon, like, I don't know, like Alistair or Keeper of Dragon Magic is really awkward, and it makes your turn extremely linear. Whereas there's like one interaction, and if they stop that normal summon, you just lose. I mean, you can't even like activate this hand map the time. Even if you're just trying to turbo into like Jumbo Drill or Stealth Union, it means you have to play these terrible cards. You get like 2 or 3 searches a turn because you can go like Dragonroid for say Stealthroid, and then like Mixroid normal, get like Truckroid or something, and then you're like, oh boy, I just drew Express Roid, and then I just need to use Megaroid City to get Drillroid, and then I just need Poly, and I can use my entire hand and everything I've got to make one of the worst monsters ever. Or even just to make Mobile Base that can't do anything on my turn 1, and then loses to Compulse, or, pretty much any sort of interaction that isn't exactly destruction removal. So overall, just everything here is really bad. It's just extremely vulnerable. The best strategies Roid can do are usually about essentially using a very small amount of the cards, because the fusion lock is so brutal that if you're trying to play some sort of fusion control deck, your best option is maybe to play weird hop your squadron builds, or to like play branded and then just put Roids in to like make branded worse, because you're like, look guys, I'm playing Roids. The best card probably is actually Guardian Chimera. I mean, it's basically an honorary Roid card, because you normal Express Roid, and then like fuse Guardian Chimera with Express Roid plus the 2 Roids it added back to hand. But overall, I just wanted to make a video where I was just talking about my major issues, because I see people saying, yeah, Roid calls it a crazy card all the time. Like, have you read this card, like, for real? Because I don't think anyone's read this. People think Vehicroid City's crazy. It's pretty good, but it's just not right there. I mean, compare this effect to, like, Fire King Island, or really, like, any number of other cards that search things like this in much better decks, and then it's like, here's the worst deck, and we made the card that has a huge lock on it, and can't even, like, combo with other copies of itself, or do really anything. And you know why it pops cards you control? To support exactly Wonder Garage, a card which, if you play, I mean, what's even the point? It can't even summon, like, Armoroid or Dragonroid. You don't have an in-archetype Reborn, so you can't summon back the Dragonroid. This affects, like, for Cyberdark for some reason. I mean, there's, like, Supercharge, not a searchable card. I mean, you can search Necroid Synchro. Not that you can use that the turn of, but you can. It's just all a mess. It's just all a mess, and the new support doesn't even help the coolest thing the deck can do, which is Barbaroid. And, I mean, without the ability to, you know, summon this with the freaking Vehicroid Connection Zone, you're just stuck making, like, mobile-based control where you summon a direct attacker every turn and then bounce it back and hope that your opponent loses, and maybe you're, like, setting spell traps and not even going plus to, I guess you are going plus because Emerge Roid Call has a graveyard effect, but it's like not even like popping cards. I don't know. It's just all a mess, and I really wish that they didn't have these silly restrictions on them that made them even more restricted than they already are. I get that restrictions are great, and I think that they're cool, but the fusion lock is so brutal when the deck doesn't even have like a generic, easy-to-make fusion that its own searchable fusion spell can do, or a generic poly that it can search. It's just really a depressing deck to play. Even just if Mixeroid had actually fusion summoned in their graveyard, I just feel like there was so much potential that these cards could have actually lived up to, and it's great that they give you a real strategy of Mixeroid into Armoroid Pass, set some traps, or like some really weird pop your own card stuff with Vehicroid City, but they're just not quite there. And it gets really frustrating playing the deck and just getting interrupted everywhere, not being able to go first because Vehicroid City, because you lose to hand traps and mobile base does like nothing, not being able to go second because if you use the consistency and like it doesn't get negated, even then you're like making mobile base and then you can't make Gustav with it. It's just truly a deck that I think has been in hell, and they're going to keep putting in hell, and it's always going to be stuck doing ability slow plays without a single fusion interaction, and they're just going to keep locking it out of Speedroid stuff, so you're just going to never get to do much of anything. And my hope is that eventually Konami will print something like interesting, or like support that gives them like more starters or extenders, but realistically, the deck's made to be bad, and so perhaps it's a good thing that we don't live in a world of like tier 0 super Mixeroid summon 5 Dragonroids from deck, but I sure as hell want to live in that world.